Snow tapers off Tuesday morning, then cloudy with a high of 32. Nightingale is your cozy, comfortable neighborhood bar and restaurant at 26th and Lyndale in Minneapolis. Come in for the famous Nightingale burger or the ginger tamari chicken wings. View their menu or place a takeout order at nightingalempls.com. Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story. This is our story. This is Ghostbox Radio with Greg Bakken.
And this is Ghostbox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakken. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Happy Monday, everybody. I wanted to say, just kind of being nice and just, cordial. And I just wanted to just say what I did over the weekend. And I don't remember. I actually was asked today, how's your weekend? And I was like, I don't remember what happened on Saturday. And that's kind of, I don't know. That's kind of sad. And before anyone has any smart ideas, had nothing to do with drinking. I have not drank. I just don't remember. I think it's more because it was uneventful on a spectacular level that there was nothing that I can remember from it. But I hope you had a more eventful weekend than I did, because it really was just like I've been struggling all afternoon to kind of think what I did. And whatever it was very boring. I can clearly give you that. And I don't even think that I cooked anything good or anything. So there we are. As we're getting into it, I'm really excited tonight to have back on Michael J. Warden. We're talking tonight about his book, his first true crime book that he had done, The Murder of Richard Jennings, the true story of New York's first murder for hire. And as you know, we haven't done a ton of true crime on the show. So I'm very excited to be able to do that and then bring on Michael tonight. And if you have any questions, if you had a chance to read this, definitely go check it out or let us know. First of all, if you haven't, it's available on Amazon. But I do ask if you go through ghostboxradio.com and on the top menu bar, it says Ghostbox Book Club. And there, if you get his book, and he has a couple books that we have on that page. If you get the book, a little bit of Do Re Mi comes back to Ghostbox Radio. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Everyone should win in these situations. Michael, welcome to Ghostbox Radio.
Hey, Greg, I'm glad to be back on. I really look forward to talking to you on these forums. So. Well, thank you.
I'm glad that you're able to get on. I know that there's a lot of busyness. A happy New Year, first of all, Michael. It's great to be able to get you on. And this is the first of your. Was this the first book that you written, or is the first true crime book?
This is the first true crime book. The first book was Ghost Detective, which I wrote.
That's right.
In 2009, about my experiences as a paranormal researcher in the paranormal field. So
sure.
This was my first foray into true crime, though.
Okay. Well, first of all, why don't we kind of delve into this a little bit? And can you tell us a little bit about the book, please?
Yeah. So The Murder of Richard Jennings it's a true historical crime. We're going back to the late 1818, so quite a few years ago. Yeah. And it's in Orange County, New York, where I come from. And at this time, there's a land dispute in a family. Mm-hmm. So basically, you have a family fighting over 50 acres of land. Now, to make a long story short, basically, a father bails his son out. The son has worked for the father, kept him debt free. So this father says, you know, after I'm dead, I'm going to give you 50 acres of land, but you can't have it till your mom passes. And the son, you know, that's a fair deal. He's got his own family. Well, the uncle, the mom's brother of all people, manages to get that 50 acres signed over to him. And that begins this protracted battle for years between uncle and nephew. The nephew's name is James Teed, and his wife is Hannah Teed. They're very important players in this. And, you know, they take pleasure basically in suing one another in the local courts. This is a time when you could have people put in jail for not paying their debts. So one of Teed's good friends, a man named David Conkling from a very well-to-do family in Orange County, gets involved in it. And at one point, he would buy debts that Richard Jennings had at double the face value, just so that he could demand the debt to be paid. And when Richard Jennings couldn't pay it, then the sheriff would have to put him into the jail until it was paid. So, you know, an absolute back and forth. And then there's another gentleman named David Dunning, who is sort of a tenant farmer with his family. I really think this guy's probably got the shortest end of the stick. And the most fascinating character is an African-American man named Jacob Hodges. He lives with David Conkling in his family. He tends his own piece of land. He's never been a slave. He's much older, too, than the rest of the men involved. And he's a former sailor, so you can imagine the papers of the time talk about this man having every vice that you can imagine a stereotypical sailor is supposed to have. So at the end of 1818, to make a really long story short, the local courts have settled the dispute over land. Richard Jennings can have the property, but he can't get it till after the first of the year. And then he can make application for possession. He's going to kick everybody off the land that is involved in anything. The Teeds are going to lose money, the Conklings. They decide the only way to get rid of this problem is to kill the old man, Richard Jennings. You know, he's already in his 70s. So they conspire, and they decide they're going to pay Jack Hodges money to kill him. And that's exactly what happens. The December of 1818, he walks up to check the wood lot, as he did on every day, because they were back and forth cutting wood. And Jack Hodges and David Dunning approach him, and he's shot, which doesn't kill him. So then he's beaten to death with the butt of a musket. And he's left there in a field. And of course, when he doesn't come home, the first place they look is the field. And within a few days, the whole plot has fallen apart. And by the beginning of the new year, 5 people have been arrested for conspiring to murder Richard Jennings or for murdering him, which is, you know, the Teeds, Dunning, Conkling, and Hodges. And in the spring of 1819, they're indicted by the grand jury, David Dunning and Jack Hodges, for murder. David Dunning also for accessory before the fact. And then everybody else is indicted for accessory before and after the fact. In New York at the time, murder and accessory to murder before the fact was a mandatory death penalty case. The judge had no sentencing discretion. So all 5 of these defendants were now facing the gallows, which is a pretty big deal. So, you know, as a researcher, and at the time I was still a detective, I was still working in that position, and it struck me as just like, I'd never heard of this. I grew up in Orange County my whole life. And how can you have such a fascinating case and no one knows about it? And there's so much more to it. I mean, I'm boiling down an obsession, really, it became for me for several years as I dug into this.
It's kind of like, first of all, for them to murder Richard Jennings, it's like, first of all, obviously these people are going to be the first people that are going to be looked at. I think it's really a testament also to how, you know, run into revenge that they were, how they, you know, it blinded them, didn't it?
Yes, it definitely blinded them. I think, you know, even the local papers at the time sort of allude to the fact that, you know, like, look, Richard Jennings was probably not long for the world anyway at his age. You probably just could have waited him out. But I think at the end, it's humiliation, it's financial concerns. they're going to be put out. They don't know where they're going to go. And I think it was the culmination of a frustration, like just we've had enough, and they made a really bad decision and followed through with that bad decision. And that really has a snowball effect of consequences for everybody involved.
It sounds like you said, this is something that you got very interested in, that was intrigued you. Did the research, like just the research of going into it, looking at it, did that come before really any decision that you wanted to write a book about it?
Yeah, so initially I started off to write the initial project was I was going to write a book about a bunch of older crimes, but like a chapter about each crime. And I quickly realized that each of these stories I was looking at required much more than a chapter to really do them justice how I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I started looking at a case up in Albany, New York. It was an 1827 murder, a love triangle, very bizarre story. And it's, of course, a haunted location. That's how I even found out about it. But it was a footnote in a legal decision in that case referencing this one that sort of caught my eye. So initially, it was going to be a whole other case for that book. And I'm still going to write that one. I just sort of got sidetracked, as you know. But so I'm like, let me just peek at this Orange County case that's sort of referenced in a legal case. From there, it just took off. And, there wasn't a lot written about it. And so I like a challenge where, okay, I'm going to tell this story and probably be the first person to ever tell it accurately, because anything written about it before me was just all over the place. And It was people repeating other bad information, the game of telephone over the last couple hundred years.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose too that, it's, and not that I'm not saying that it's right that they did this, but they probably didn't really care, because who's going to check up on the facts?
I think
you are, but
right. And I think that was part of it. And I think, the racial attitudes at the time, if it fell apart, I think they thought, well, who's going to believe Jack Hodges? He's an African American. Yeah. He's illiterate. He doesn't read. He's a wicked sailor, a drunk. Well, even if we get caught, yeah, they may get him, but are they really going to think we were somehow involved in it? And I really think that was part of it. There's no way to prove that, but I do believe that was sort of in the back of their minds. That was their fail-safe.
Well, and two, that there's something to be said that, and I think anytime that you do this sort of work, when you're looking back in history or something, that you're kind of putting in a sense, the soul of Richard Jennings' soul to rest in a sense, because you're doing the due diligence to tell the whole correct story, which, like you said, hadn't really been around. No one really knew.
Yes, exactly. And everything that's written about Richard Jennings is he doesn't sound like he was a very nice guy. He was definitely tough, because even after he was allegedly beaten to death and left as dead, when they did find him, he had managed to crawl a distance in the ground. Even after having been shot and beaten, he managed to crawl a certain distance before he finally died. So, his memory, whatever his personality was, deserves to be remembered. And, what happened to him.
Well, if you say that, maybe he wasn't going to live. Maybe he was going to live a lot longer than you thought, or they thought.
He might have. I mean, this was probably a guy that worked the land. He worked his whole life and just was. He was tough as nails, I guess.
He might have still been around now if they didn't murder him. For all I know. I don't know.
Had he lived, had he survived, I could have interviewed him possibly.
Are you sure? It's interesting. You being a paranormal investigator as well, I don't think we've ever really talked about this too much. Have you ever tried to reach out to the people that you are doing your books on?
I haven't, and not because it hasn't crossed my mind, but I sort of walk a very fine line between the paranormal researcher side of me and then the true crime / historian in me that looks for that what's the happy medium between these two different worlds I sort of wobble between. And I just sort of felt like if I blended them too much, it may inhibit the credibility in the historical field. So I want those works to stand as independent, works.
In my mind, though, it's not something that you have to share with anybody, though.
That's true. And, maybe that's something you and I should talk about sometime,
I'd like to, because, that is actually, funny enough, we just had on Angela Boley. I don't know if you know her. She's a psychic portrait artist, and she's been talking about her past lives. She's been tracking them down. And on Friday, I suggested to her, why don't we do a spirit box session? That's my jam. So, I mean, like you said, and that's just it. These are, if you did get a hold of them, it's private moments,
Right.
Is that Richard playing with your camera that you're unable to keep it steady, or because he is tough?
Yes, it is. Sorry about that.
It's quite all right. It's all right.
It's the lack of heat in my office, actually.
It's, the funny thing is the majority of our audience is on radio, and they would have had no idea if I didn't out you. So.
Oh, thanks.
Why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's go ahead, take our first break. When we come back, we're going to continue talking with Michael J. Warden about his true crime book, The Murder of Richard Jennings, the true story of New York's finest first murder mystery for hire. You're listening to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950.
Magus Books, your multicultural spiritual supply store. Stop in and expand your horizons with books, classes, readings, and supplies at magusbooks.com or in our shop at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis. From the best incense to beautiful statues, we have supplies and books for your spiritual explorations. Come in and chat with our knowledgeable staff and get what you need for your next adventure, whether you're fighting ghosts or opening your third eye. Check us out today at magusbooks.com.
If you own a holistic or metaphysical business and are looking to expand, then you need to be listed on metamorphosisconnections.com. It's a network where you can grow with like-minded practitioners and reach new clients. Metamorphosisconnections.com is an online directory you need to list yourself and your business. Our platform makes it easy for you to create listings of your products and services, and you can also choose to list your classes, events, and so much more. Metamorphosisconnections.com helps you create weekly and monthly promotional ads targeted towards your potential clients and promotes them for you via social media and newsletter. There are clients searching for your specialty right now. Let us help them find you. Start your listing today so you can share your own unique gifts and talents by finding the level of membership that best fits your needs. Let us help you reach your clients that are searching for what you do. Visit metamorphosisconnections.com and sign up today.
I'm little teapot, short and stout.
Here is my handle and here is my spout.
No, Dad, like this. When I get all steamed up, then I shout, tip me over and pour me out.
This is WWE superstar Roman Reigns. It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
Visit fatherhood.gov, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Jody, also known as Witch Jody on social media. I opened Midwest Witchery and Healing in historic Stillwater because as a nurse, I love to help others. When you come and visit Midwest Witchery and Healing, you will find everything from divination and magical services, classes to ritual tools, jewelries, handcrafted candles, witchy gear, and much more. My store is a safe environment for all on their own unique path. Look for the purple door. Find out more at MidwestWitcheryHealing.com.
And welcome back to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950. My name is Greg Bakken. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I am still trying to sit here trying to figure out what I did this past weekend. I really have no idea, but that's okay. It doesn't matter because the main thing to talk about right now is that we have author Michael J. Warden. We've been talking about the first true crime book that he wrote back in 2013, which was The Murder of Richard Jennings, the true story of New York's first murder for hire. I want to keep saying finest murder for hire. It is or not, but
it wasn't the finest. That's for sure.
It seemed very flawed. As we were talking about in the last segment. I mean, it just seemed, and this is why you never get involved with your family on any sort of, and really any level. But
no.
When it comes to, it's just the money brings out the worst in everybody, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, I always go back to something people say, things were so much better in the days gone by in the past. And really, people were killing people over reasons as financial like this going way back. We weren't any better than we are today.
Michael,
we just hear about it more.
I think that's a fantastic point, because I was thinking about this just in the world in general. And there are things that are truly heinous. There are things that are maybe much different than they were back then. But, because of the world not being connected as it is now, I also noticed that, there are so many bad things that have happened in the past that have simply been forgotten to time. If it never made like national attention, even stuff that did make national attention, not that this is a heinous thing, but I just think about like, what the UFO thing, the battle for Los Angeles during World War II, something like that is not necessarily known by a whole lot of people.
Right. So
and
it's good to remember these events and keep them going.
It sure is. And for those of you who don't know what that is, and you're like, why was that? Battle for what? Go look it up. I did an episode about it about 2 years ago. So go listen to my shows. Okay, so this is what it's come down to, Michael. It's like,
hey, listen,
I'm
do what you gotta do.
Yeah, right. Please listen. All right. So, okay, a couple things that I had seen that you had noted was that you had talked about that there was some myths and legends that were kind of surrounding this, what happened here with Richard Jennings. Could you kind of go into a little bit more detail about that, please?
Yeah. So the first actual source I found that told the story, purported to tell the story at least, really delved into the case. Almost 90% of it probably either misinformation or wrong, but there was a lot of legends that seemed to crop up. And there were also some of these repeated at the time of the case. So it's a mixture of things that were happening in 1818/19, and then later on when the story is being told, decades and probably more than that later. Some of them being like, so ultimately 2 of the men are hanged in front of 20,000 people in 1819. So that's a lot of people. That was actually the population of Orange County, was 20,000. So 2 of the men were hanged. 2 of the other men had their sentences commuted to prison. And the only one who kind of got off was Hannah Teed. She was pregnant. And they allowed her to plead to a non-death penalty offense.
Okay.
She went insane and ended up drowning herself in the Hudson River a few years later. Very sad.
And if she wasn't pregnant, though, she would have hanged as well.
I think, but I also think that they were looking for a way out. There hadn't been a hanging in Orange County since the Revolutionary War.
Oh,
they hanged Claudia Smith, who was they called him the cowboy of the Ramapo. But I think they didn't want to hang a woman. They already were looking at hanging 4 men.
Yeah.
I don't think, and I understand that. But ironically, Jack Hodges is the one who testifies against everybody else, the African-American man.
Yeah.
He actually turns witness against everybody. So, fascinating. I think they thought they wouldn't believe him, but it turns out that an African-American man convicted the other 3 white males that were involved in this case. So,
yeah,
an interesting twist of events. But some of the legends that really popped up, for example, there was a legend that the men that were hanged, they couldn't find a place to bury them, that no cemetery would accept the bodies.
Oh, okay.
And so later at the end of the day, a local cemetery said, yes, you can bury them on our property, but they cannot be inside the walls of the cemetery. You can bury them on the outside of the cemetery walls, meaning in the unconsecrated ground.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then it's rumored that late at night, after these men had been, interred into their graves, a group of men came along with giant locust stakes and drove them into the graves. Now, the only reason someone would be driving stakes into the grave goes back to old superstitions around vampires.
Yes.
And being buried in unconsecrated soil, hanged people, suicides, etc. A lot of people had very strange fears of these things. So to think they were doing that in 1819 is kind of creepy.
It is. It is. And do you? I mean, it wasn't stated as such, though, right? I mean, it's just what that everyone believes is what they believe as far as staking those corpses.
Right. And ultimately, what I found out was that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Okay.
No, they were buried privately with their families, and I'm not sure exactly what cemeteries. I couldn't find that. But probably on private. The Teeds, for example, were big farmers. They had a big farm property. They're probably buried on a property of their own. But another one that was rumored in the local papers was that one of the men had been brought back to life after he was hanged. David Dunning. He'd been seen walking around Orange County in the days following his death. Now, this turned out to be such a powerful rumor in 1819 that after a week, they went and exhumed his grave.
Yeah.
And of course, when they opened his grave, he was still lying quite dead in his coffin where he had been placed. But that had floated around, and apparently I was able to find evidence that they did attempt to revive him using galvanic experiments. So there's a hint of truth to that rumor.
There is a hint. And as Chuck says, you can't hang a man twice.
No, you can't. So I wish I could find out more about the galvanic aspect of it. That pops up in a lot of these old cases.
It's interesting. First of all, thank you to Chuck. Also, Chuck is on, I believe that's probably on my Ghostbox Radio Facebook page. He's been putting up the links to go ahead and get the book, The Murder of Richard Jennings, The True Story of New York's First Murder for Hire. Also, he put up the link for Lynched by a Mob, the 1892 lynching of Robert Lewis in Port Jervis, New York, which we also did an episode of that you can go and find. And then he also put up the link for Ghost Detective.
Thank you.
Are you paying him for this? I mean,
no, no, but I appreciate the, hey, listen, if I can get my books out there, I'll never make it rich, but I do like knowing that they're being out there and being read.
You know what I
find? By more than just my parents.
Right. Well, you know what's interesting too is that when you said that there hadn't been a hanging since the Revolutionary War in 1818, that's not that far apart, actually. That's the weird thing about that. I mean, it's far enough, but I mean, it's still like, I think about that. It's like, yeah, that was another 200 years or something. No, it was a matter of probably 25 to 30 years.
Right. Yeah, it really isn't that far away. But to them, it would have been, these would have been a big population change. And I think, and it was a big spectacle, like it would have been at those days. But let me get back to the legends real quick.
Yes.
So in addition to the sort of that supernatural overtone, there was legends that, there was this dramatic moment on the gallows where they brought all of the condemned people, all 5, according to the articles. And, moments before they're about to be hanged, the sheriff pulls out of his pocket a piece of paper and reads that, the sentences had been commuted for, 3 of them. Well, that never happened. And, they were never taken off the gallows. They were never even brought there. But that did happen in Cooperstown at the beginning of the 1800s to a man.
Sure.
So, the sheriff waited right up till the final moment and then decided to tell him he wasn't going to hang. But he let him get really close. So
now we know where those television tropes came from.
Yes, they really did happen, apparently. But I think the most fascinating was this character of Jack Hodges, because they talk about Jack Hodges and David Conkling. Those are the 2 men that get their sentences commuted. Yeah. And both end up getting out of prison at some point. They do go to state prison. And David Conkling, it's rumored, was very sick. And he died shortly after getting out. And his family was so appalled by his conviction that they changed the spelling of his name on his gravestone. And they even put the wrong date of death on his gravestone, so that you couldn't tell it was him.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a silly rumor, a little bit of truth on the gravestone part, because he died in 1840, and the 4 was wearing off of the gravestone, so it looked like 1810. So someone in the future, after he died, in the 60s, 50s, looked at his grave and saw 1810. And his last name was Conkling, but they had dropped the G, so it was Conklin on his gravestone.
Okay.
Which they tended to switch back and forth anyway. They weren't hiding anything. It was just what it was. But Jack Hodges, if I could meet one person from my books, it would be Jack. It said that when he was in prison, he found God, had this miraculous spiritual awakening, became a revered spiritual leader in the Finger Lakes region of New York, upstate New York, lived for a while in the home of William H. Seward. That would be the future President Lincoln's Secretary of State, William H.
There
Seward.
would be, yeah.
Who was from Orange County, by the way. His father was one of the commissioners on the court where Jack was convicted, Samuel Seward. And then Jack ended up going to live in Canandaigua, where when he died, they erected a monument in his honor. Now, I thought that was just so much information. How can any of that be true, let alone all of it, right? Well, Jack Hodges didn't live with William H. Seward, so that part wasn't true. However, he did live at the steward's office, or the steward's building of the Auburn Theological Seminary. So I think there was some truth. He lived with a steward. William Seward did live up in Auburn, had a place, and the New York, I think the Orange County connection was a bit much. But it turns out Jack Hodges does have quite the monument in his honor in Canandaigua, New York.
Wow.
And he did become a spiritual leader. He was one of the first inmates to be brought up to Auburn prison when it was opened. And back then, inmates weren't allowed to talk. You were supposed to be penitentiary.
Okay.
They were given a Bible. Jack couldn't read or write, but he taught himself to read with the Bible. A minister sat with him and started with "in the beginning." And not only did Jack learn to read, but he does have this, and he describes it when you read, there's books about Jack Hodges, and it's almost a supernatural awakening he has in his cell, where he becomes overcome with what the Spirit of God and Christ, and he becomes someone who's sought out. People come to the prison to visit him and to minister with him. And when he's released, he is eventually brought into the home of a widow up in Canandaigua, where he works. He lives in her carriage house, takes care of her property. He's much older too. He's not a young man. He attends church in the Congregational Church, First Congregational Church, and he does not sit with the African Americans. He sits with the white congregation in their rented booth, their rented pew, because back then they had to rent their pews. So he sat with the white people. The African Americans had to sit on a balcony overlooking the church. This is when slavery is legal in a lot of parts of the country.
Right.
Still.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he would minister. So families having spiritual crises, he would go to their homes to minister to them, to counsel them, to pray with them. And these were the homes of white people in Canandaigua. In fact, he didn't associate, it said, with the African American community locally, that he really kept to himself. When the home he lived in, when the house was being sold, they sold it on the condition that the new owner had to keep him on, let him live in the carriage house until he died. And the new owner was a man named Myron Clark, who later went on to be a governor of New York. So he did live with someone rather prestigious, a future governor. And it's his daughter that ends up, they do put a marble monument on his grave. And then Myron Clark's daughter later has a bronze plaque put on it because the marble is sort of getting a little worn.
Sure.
But he has this beautiful monument, and it talks about how he was condemned, wicked, tempted to sin, and found God. His funeral was well attended in 1840s. It was like the whole town turned out to see Jack Hodges off. Just at the end of this whole research I did, this horrible crime, this lives upended. You know, the Teeds, for example, they had kids, and you know, their father's hanged, their mother is insane and drowns herself, and these kids are raised by other family members, fortunately, and it seems to have gone on to normal lives. But the effect this had on so many other people, and then to see at the very end this glimpse of redemption at the end was just it was very good. I liked that part of it.
It's odd and backwards to think that Hodges may not have found that if none of this had happened.
Yes, that is the truth. And you know, there's some controversy whether Hodges actually killed him or the other man, David Dunning, did. Dunning claims he was there when it happened, but didn't participate. Hodges says, yeah, I shot him, but I only hit his ear. And then Dunning beat him to death. So whatever really happened, was Jack motivated by guilt? Maybe because he sent an innocent man to his death, David Dunning. You know, we'll never know. But his conversion was certainly real. You know, there's no doubt that that his experiences in his later life, and they actually use him, some people, this was a big debate at the time, for the death penalty. And people that were against the death penalty used him as an example of, look what would have happened if you had hanged Jack Hodges. Look what you would have lost this. This is the man he became. This is why you shouldn't. You know, like, look at, he is redeemable. People can be redeemed. So it's an interesting argument.
It really is. Why don't we go ahead, take our next break? When we come back, I still want to talk a little bit more about these myths and legends. There's a lot more to talk about with this book. We're talking with Michael J. Warden. You're listening to Ghostbox Radio on AM 950.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with metamorphosisconnections.com. Metamorphosisconnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search metamorphosisconnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on metamorphosisconnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting metamorphosisconnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's metamorphosisconnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
Life after military service is different. Many veterans find transitioning difficult, feeling lost and uncertain about the future. These feelings don't take away from a veteran's strength, courage, or sense of duty. If you're a veteran in crisis or know one who is, the power of one person, one connection, one act of compassion can make a difference. For free 24/7 confidential support, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1, or visit veteranscrisisline.net.
Turn to Auto Technical with your vehicle donation. Even though Auto Technical is a small nonprofit, we have helped more families with transportation than any organization in Minnesota. Since '94, we have reconditioned donated vehicles so they have a higher tax benefit. Call Richard at 612-919-5526, 612-919-5526, or autotech.org.
With a look at your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Williams. Snow returns overnight with a low of 27. Snow tapers off Tuesday morning, then cloudy with a high of 32. Nightingale is your cozy, comfortable neighborhood bar and restaurant at 26th and Lindale in Minneapolis. Come in for the famous Nightingale burger or the ginger tamari chicken wings. View their menu or place a takeout order at nightingalempls.com.
And join us tomorrow on Ghostbox Radio as we are going to bring in Mr. Zero. You're probably wondering, you might not be wondering who Mr. Zero is. If you are in the Twin Cities, he has a place where you can get pop culture stuff in the Twin Cities. He's in Roseville. He's going to be in studio tomorrow. He wants to be in all of this all of this grandeur tomorrow. And we're going to have him in here. We'll put him in the other room, and we're going to be talking about pop culture. We're going to talk about some of the stuff he sells, bands, because he's been around a couple. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I really don't know what else to say about it other than that, because I think this is going to go all sorts of places. It's going to be a lot of fun. Then Wednesday, I'm going to have on Evidential Medium Debbie Romero. She's kindly giving her time to do one question readings for us. That's Wednesday. Get your questions together, because these are always very fun, very enjoyable. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Debbie has to say. It's going to be a great program. We are talking with Michael J. Warden. He's the author of The Murder of Richard Jennings, the true story of New York's first murder for hire. We've also, once again, go to ghostboxradio.com, and you can look up what our earliest discussion since I went nightly, talking about Lynched by a Mob, the 1892 lynching of Robert Lewis in Port Jervis, New York. Michael, none of your titles are short, are they, for your book? They are very, a lot of syllables, a lot of words. They don't fit on any of the art that I make.
No, I promise my next one, I'll pick a shorter title. I hope.
It just needs to be like a letter, not even a word. Just give me a letter, like K or something, and then I think that'd be great.
I could do that.
No, you can't. No one would want you to. Well, Greg said to do so.
That's what I'll call the book, though. Greg told me to pick one letter. That'll be the subtitle.
That's my only chance for fame, being the villain on a title of a book. Lynette says, yes, I agree that a person can redeem their life, and is another excellent reason not to have the death penalty. Now, I don't want to really get into that whole thing, because that's a whole other situation. But your point that you made in the last segment, Michael, is just simply the fact that that he was able to redeem himself. Why don't we just leave it at that? Right. That he was able to redeem himself. If people want to use those things for an argument one way or other, that's where they're at with that. But the good news, the end of the day, is that he was able to turn his life around.
Right, exactly. And he seemed to have an impact, a positive impact on those he did come in contact with at some point after his conversion, and of course when he's released. So, in Jack Hodges' case, this is what his life became. And I think there was also a movement at the time just to make prisons a little better.
Yeah.
At the time, the whole notion of incarcerating people for long periods of time was still relatively newish. Prisons were starting to evolve. You had Eastern State and Philly, you had Auburn, Point Pleasant in New York, which became Sing Sing. So, they were looking for better ways to try to rehabilitate prisoners in general.
Yeah.
Knowing that most are going to probably get out. Not all, but most, even at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Chuck has said that there's so much unknown history found in local legends and stories, as you have very much found out, Michael. Chuck has lived in and still lives close by Auburn, and he has never heard this story before. So there you go.
Yeah. So, Jim, head over to Canandaigua and the Pioneer Cemetery there. You can see right where Jack is buried. They have a historical society in town. They actually have his bed. I got to see Jack's bed at the Historical Society. So, they had it up in storage. But, a congregation member who went to the same church that Jack had attended, who was very fascinated with Jack, actually did research on the family, knew what pew they sat in. So when I went up in about 2018, I think it was, to speak up there and meet him, I got to see, this is where Jack would have sat and worshiped. The church probably hasn't changed that much. And, the bed, this was his bed that he slept in, that he lived his life in, and a very tangible piece of the past that we don't normally get to connect with sometimes. But I find that personal connection with artifacts and locations to be important.
what does that do for you when you have those connections to pieces like that? And I don't necessarily, I mean, however you want to answer it, because I mean, as a paranormal investigator, as somebody who is, loves to be steeped in history, what does that do for you?
I think it probably reaches a whole bunch of different aspects of who I am. I'm certainly can't rule out the fact that I have that connection as an investigator of the unusual paranormal things,
Mhm.
but also just when you can be at the location of an event or incident, you can stand where the history occurred or touch an item related to that specific case or person. It just closes a gap. There's such a big gap between when I wrote this book, it came out in 2013, and Jack Hodges dying in the early 1840s. There's a tremendous amount of time has gone by, yet here's an object that I can physically see, I can physically touch, that connects Jack Hodges and myself across this span of time. I can see where he sat. This is his pew. This is where every Sunday he worshiped and prayed. And again, it brings you close to that story. And I think that's important. And there's something to be said about, as a police officer, as a detective, when you investigate a crime, when you visit the crime scene.
Yeah.
There's nothing beats, going to the scene yourself, even if you're not the one collecting the evidence. Going to the crime scene is important. Seeing it with your own eyes and understanding it, and just remembering that these are, I've handled homicides, and remembering that the person's death that you're investigating was a person.
Yeah.
It's not just, a black and white investigation where I'm just strictly, you still have to remember, yeah, this was a person, who I have to get justice for.
And I think that was going to be the next question I was going to ask, that I think you've answered, was why is it important to remember these people? And I don't even mean, because it's like, I think there's two pieces to it, and I think you've answered them both very satisfactory. Where it's like, yeah, there's one thing about talking about a heinous crime. There's something talking about something that we all we as true crime fans really like to experience, as far as reading and stuff. But there is a human level to this, isn't there? That I feel like if anybody who's going to write about this stuff doesn't include that in some way, you're doing a very huge misjustice for the material in general.
Yeah, I have to agree with you 100,000,000%. And I think I try to really keep that human connection. And that's humanizing the victim, whoever the person is in the case that is, killed or assaulted, whatever the case may be. These are people. There's much more to their life than this one moment that defines them. The people associated with that person, what happens to them? What did they go through? Murders especially, and I know it's almost cliched, but for the person that's murdered, it's over.
Yeah.
They're done. Their suffering is over. It's the people that are with them and around them. And, I'll just briefly mention, as a detective, I had one case which to this day haunts me. The kids went to school in the morning. Life was normal. They were elementary school kids. And after their dad dropped them off, he came home, murdered their mother, and tried to blow himself up in the house. Well, he didn't blow up. But fortunately, I didn't have the job, but I was in my office, and, right across the hall, I could hear the crime victim counselor and the juvenile detective telling the children that they're never going to see their mother again. And just the horrible, horrible pain that those kids went through.
Yeah.
And probably still go through to this day. I mean, just that never ends. These people suffer, and, it's important to remember them, and also remember the people associated with them. They continue to suffer. It's never truly over for them.
Well, and you think about that too, in the sense of the orbit that it creates. As you just mentioned, but one that you even just talk about, which I'm assuming you understand it as you talk about it, that it includes yourself. Like what this person did has now affected you, and it's like, well, you were a detective, obviously but you weren't a detective on the case, and you were just in there, and you're hearing it, but it's never left you. I mean, these are the residual effects of when someone does something like that, and you could probably have that a million times over with different detectives and police officers throughout history who have seen, or soldiers who have seen stuff, and it's never left them, because of what one act, something that happened, the effect of it.
Oh, absolutely. There's a few things that still haunt me, and probably will till I'm dead. But that's just that's part of the job.
Well, yeah. I mean, I also think about too, like an effect. I mean, of like, as I always think about my great uncle who was on Normandy, and he never had talked really about it, but when he did, he tells the story of when they're in the tanks and he's on the beaches of Normandy, and his tank buddy decided to see what was going on out there by lifting his head out of the tank. Right, you could already see where this is going, and he comes back in the tank without a head, and it just, I mean, my great uncle passed away in 1997, and I'm still, that hasn't left me. I mean, that's the thing, that's the human side of it, and I think that's what keeps us on the side of, hopefully on the side of, not killing everybody in sight, because we feel that empathy of those moments.
Yes, absolutely.
Emily on the chat, she says humans are capable of great and terrible things, and I think maybe that's the name of your next book.
Yeah, it really sums it up, Emily. I think perfectly.
Really,
it's look at we are capable of putting people on the moon and sending the Voyager spacecraft at the edge of our solar system, and then we're also capable of just the worst inhumanity towards one another in the same breath. And it's so I try to focus on the positive, though. We continue to move forward, hopefully.
So as we have just a couple minutes left, I have to ask you, Mr. UFO, your thoughts in Miami this last weekend.
Yeah, I don't think it was aliens. I know I saw what was supposed to have been a video of an alien. I didn't see an alien in that video.
No.
Yeah, it was like someone, I don't know if it was a cell phone. It just looked like a very dark and image with things moving in it. As much as I'd like to think we're having an alien invasion, I don't know how that could have been hidden very well.
As much as I'd like to think we're having an alien wow. Wow, okay, that's
the paranormal researcher in me, I mean, I'm also the guy that used to say, I'll try not to get too excited when the zombie apocalypse happens,
Oh my gosh, that's everyone's gonna be freaking out, and you're out there going, finally, where were you?
Take me with you.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too, kind of based on what we're talking about with the book, as well, is those myth and legend sort of things where, what we're hearing is that everybody is seeing something different than what's being reported.
Right.
And it's, you're like, are we having a Men in Black moment here or something? But the thing ultimately is that even in this day and age, and when we talked about the world being connected, it doesn't matter. No one, people are not getting the facts correct.
Right. Misinformation is so much. The game of telephone today is a lot easier to happen with the internet.
Well, and you do have to wonder a little bit too, if, not wonder. I mean, it's a fact that people, love to put out the wrong information as well, and
yes.
cause stirs and stuff. And we're out of time, so I don't know if any of the stuff we had talked about with the legends and stuff for Richard Jennings' case, if that's the case. But once again, folks, go and buy the book, The Murder of Richard Jennings, The True Story of New York's First Murder for Hire. Definitely, you can get it through Amazon. If you get it through Ghostbox Radio, go to Ghostbox Book Club. If you get it through there, we get a little bit of money back, just a couple pennies, which is probably more than you got paid to write the book. So, I mean, that's something, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that's just too funny and too true at the same time. Michael J. Warden, as always, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
This was fun. I really appreciated it. Once again, folks, go please support authors like Michael, because these are great books. A lot of work put into them. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking with Mr. Zero, and we're going to talk about all sorts of great things. We'll see you tomorrow. Everyone, have a great night.
Hey, Minnesota, it's Brad Friedman, host of the Bradcast. You're listening to AM 950 KTNF, St. Louis Park, Minneapolis, St. Paul.